Oh shit, I forgot to put my thing. Oh, damn it.
Hey, folks. This is Alexander Winn.
Oh, hey. I'm Lacey Hannan.
And and you're watching the latest episode of The Synthesis, which started a couple of seconds sooner than we thought it would. Welcome to the show. This week we are talking about Interstellar, the 2014 film by Chris Nolan. But before we get to that, we have an exciting announcement, which is that all of you who have been watching The Synthesis on YouTube, and especially who have been watching it on YouTube Live, you are going to have a new way to listen to The Synthesis, which is that we are releasing it as a podcast. Starting tonight, basically, tomorrow, we will be releasing episodes of The Synthesis 3 each week as we catch back up to where we are now on iTunes and Spotify and all the places that you get your podcasts. So be sure to check it out. If you are listening to this as a podcast, know that we are talking to you from the past, and we hope that the future is working out well. Unlike it did in Interstellar.
My notes app is just not killing it today. So we're gonna see how this goes, guys. I'm killing it today.
Yeah. A bit of backstory for this particular movie, just so everybody knows the journey that we've been on. Lacey and I really wanted to see Interstellar in theaters. When it came out, we were both really excited. And we kept deciding, we're going to go this weekend, and then something would come up, and then, we're going to go next week, and then something would come up, and then finally it wasn't in theaters anymore. And then it came out on, iTunes and all that, and we were like, we should rent that.
And part of it was we were like, this really seems like a movie we should watch on the big screen.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out how to watch it on a bigger screen than our TV at home.
And I think they even re-released it in theaters a couple of times. We were like, oh great, we can finally watch it on the big screen. And then we didn't do that. And
everybody's like, you guys are gonna love this movie.
Yeah.
So this movie was super hyped for us.
Yeah, it's been 7 years. Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then we started getting to a point where we didn't really want to watch it because it had been hyped.
Yeah.
And, we'd seen some reviews. So there was just...
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a little bit of... There was curiosity, but a little bit of fear around watching
a little trepidation. The other thing to note as we talk about this, of course, The Synthesis is a show where we not only talk about entertainment, we talk about how scientifically accurate it is. And after we watched Interstellar, I was doing some research on some of the science, and I discovered that there's a guy out there who was the scientific consultant on Interstellar and who has subsequently written a book called The Science of Interstellar, in which he sort of justifies a lot of stuff that people generally say was unscientific and explains some things that you might not realize are scientific. And anyway, he has apparently responded to a lot of reviews about it, talking about the scientific accuracy. So if anybody finds our bodies dead with a Nobel Prize sticking out of our corpse, know that it was Kip Thorne, Caltech physicist and interstellar consultant, who, by the way, 3 years after Interstellar came out, won a Nobel Prize, along with Rainier Weiss and Barry C. Barish, and I love the name Barry C. Barish, for, and I quote, decisive contributions to the LIGO detector and the observation of gravitational waves. So, rock on, Kip Thorne. Congratulations on your Nobel Prize, and I'm sorry if I say anything that makes you mad.
Yeah, I'm surprised that Interstellar had a consultant. So, that's where we're starting from.
Yeah.
We are going to do our best to not just hate on this movie. There are things that I will point out, some of the stuff that I loved, but it's not the science. So buckle up.
Yep. If you're watching this live, be sure to chime in the comments and let us know, are you an Interstellar superfan, or do you think that Interstellar was super overrated? Have you not seen it? Where do you stand on Interstellar? Because, Lacey and I, we had decisive opinions about the film.
We do, and I think that we would love to answer what do we think of J.J. Abrams, but because this episode could go so quickly down the we hate everything
Yeah.
rabbit hole. We should not answer that question.
Yeah, I went on a bit of a rant yesterday during a TerraGenesis Q&A about J.J. Abrams, which I assume is where this question is coming from, because in an hour-long Q&A, I think I spent about 20 minutes of it just ranting about how much I hate J.J. Abrams. So if that wasn't where this question came from, then you are really on the ball. But yeah,
I've worked with him once.
Not my favorite J.J. Abrams.
For
Yeah,
a hot second,
Lacey worked
but
with him as an actress, so that was cool.
voiceover.
Yeah,
It was fine.
yeah.
Okay, let's talk about
Interstellar.
Interstellar.
Yes.
Okay, so right off the top, I really thought that I was gonna love this movie because I love how many questions that they just they bring up for the audience. Okay, so we've got some of these quotes. He was a farmer like everyone else.
Yeah.
Excuse me, what? This is not a job that most people do, let alone everyone.
Well, especially because he was a farmer like everyone else back then, is
Yeah.
the full line, which sets up this interesting dichotomy because on the one hand, this movie opens in a fairly, not quite apocalyptic, but sort of bordering on post-apocalyptic world, but at the same time, the first line of the film implies that things get better.
Yeah.
So we're not actually supposed to think that the world is ending because clearly this old person survived it and is speaking of it in the past tense.
Right.
So,
And he's farming corn like the rest of us. What does that mean? The Air Force drone, who just takes off after an Air Force drone like that to the point of ruining crops and probably your truck when we're in a world that your truck is going to be highly important. This is a valuable thing to own, right? So I found all of the questions to be fun and interesting because in our world, if you were to attempt to take down an Air Force drone, the Air Force would come look for you.
yeah.
And so I'm sitting here going, what do they think he thinks he's going to do something
hack it,
and
yeah.
hack it and
Especially
keep
because
it
it's the Indian Air Force. It's not even the American Air Force. This is clearly something that the airspace is not particularly well patrolled
Right.
anymore.
So the fact that we've got all of these questions that are just, hey, here's the thing about this world. I love being thrown into a world. I think that's one of my favorite things is when people are like, I will help you understand this, but we're going to drop you into the world page 1. And there's something about being wrapped up in it that is just really fun. And I'm an escapist. So give me the ability to escape. And this is one great way of doing it. And so I got really excited. Also, I want to know where the film was filmed.
Yeah.
Because it was beautiful. This
Yeah.
is not the corn state that I am used to. Nebraska's flat and boring. Iowa somehow is greener, and so it's a little less boring. I don't know. There's just it's you can love the prairie, and I do, and still think that every so often driving down I-80 through all of the cornfields, it can get a little boring, right? But this was, got the mountains in the
Gorgeous.
background. Oh, it was stunning.
Well, I mean, the visuals in the whole movie are incredible. The cornfield is gorgeous, but also is sort of the least of the gorgeous
Yeah.
scenes, and is the ice planet, presumably filmed in Greenland or something, was incredible. Probably the most famous image from this movie is the black hole, which was done using crazy scientific calculations to render what a black hole would actually look like, and it was gorgeous.
The wormhole,
Yeah.
the images of Saturn, I think that was probably my favorite. I almost cried
Yeah.
when we went by Saturn because it was just stunning.
So gorgeous.
So there are some things that I love,
Yep.
but they pretty much show up at the beginning, or they're the imagery. So there's that. I just from a film thing, I am really sick of, and I feel like sci-fi does this a lot because Arrival does it too. But Christopher Nolan did it in Dunkirk, which is the dialogue is so quiet and the action scenes are so loud.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly playing with the remote, trying to not like blow out your speakers.
Yeah, the audio compression is, I feel like people are sort of not doing audio compression anymore. Like a lot of movies these days, the loud is really loud and the quiet is really quiet. And I guess it's supposed to make it feel more epic and real, I guess, but it just...
Or intimate in the dialogue scenes. But for me, I mean, I know that I don't have perfect hearing, but I want to be able to hear the movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess I'll turn on subtitles, but there's a certain amount of...
Which we did, actually, as we were watching this movie. We, like 2/3 of the way in, we finally were just like, I guess we just need to turn on subtitles because some of these scenes, we can't understand them.
And you know, we talk about Michael Cera being like the king of mumblecore, but I would like to nominate Matthew McConaughey because, oh my God, speak up, enunciate, like you're an actor. We are taught how to do these things. And I get it. It's supposed to be... We're not living in the time of Stanislavski. We are living in a time of hyper-realism in terms of acting and the stories that we tell and stuff like that. So, but, you know, we're also taught by our mothers to speak up. Unless it's just my mom. I don't know. But there were a couple of just like film problems. Script-wise, I'm going to skip the science part for now.
Yeah, we're going to circle back around to the science later in the show.
But I found that the dialogue was hyper melodramatic. And I struggled with that because it just felt unnecessary. So we're not going to do this in chronological order.
Yeah.
There's no point. That argument with Matt Damon, Dr. Mann, is that his name? Yeah. Come on. Like, I feel like that was, I'm trying to find the right word.
It's sort of,
they tried too hard.
They tried too hard, and it's sort of the, you know, people make fun of movies in general, but especially sort of spy films and superhero films for bad guys who monologue. Yeah. And that's what that was. Like, it was literally just the bad guy pontificating on his worldview about instinct and survivalism, and
it was practically a soliloquy.
Yeah.
Like it was you know, Matthew McConaughey's character didn't need to be there, and it just it felt forced, and I was not into it. That's just one of many melodramatic moments.
Yeah, I didn't really know what to do with Anne Hathaway's speech about how love is the only thing that can transcend time and space, and that like we didn't invent love, it must be an artifact of a higher dimension. Like, yeah, I mean, I get that not everybody's as into like neurochemistry as I am, but no, we did invent love. Like love is a thing that happens in the brain. It's you can reproduce it chemically. It's not the artifact of a higher dimension. And the one that really just lost me was when the computer tells him that's not possible, and Cooper responds, "No, it's necessary." And I just wanted the computer to be like, "I don't think you know what possible means. I don't care if it's necessary. That's not that you still can't do it, even if it's necessary."
Right. Yeah. There were, you know, and then there were these arguments that were so like about the poetry that it didn't really feel like they ever got to their point in a way that made sense. I don't know how many of you have seen the very old movie Adam's Rib, which they should someday make a remake, retitle it. It's a men versus women
battle of the sexes.
Battle of the sexes. Yeah. It's a husband and a wife who are lawyers and are on opposite sides of the same case. And it's fun. My biggest problem with it is the woman's arguments are not well executed. And I feel like this movie continually doesn't execute its arguments. And which means that I guess what people are trying to say, and I think I'm right, but you could have done better, you know? And I wanted it to be elevated, and I didn't feel like, I felt like they tried to elevate it by making it like really hyper intellectual without actually, when you're doing that and not making your point, that then you're failing And
Well, and it's okay.
That was frustrating.
You know, it's okay to just be poetic. You know, the thing in that speech from Anne Hathaway about love being an artifact of a higher dimension, you didn't need to frame it in the language of science. Like, just have it be a speech about the power of love to motivate people, that we are social animals and love will always be the most powerful driving force in our behavior. That's all you need.
Yeah.
You don't need to frame it in the language of quantum physics to make it profound. And I found that there were a bunch of moments in this that they tried to draw profound meaning from things that didn't mean that. You know, starting with, for example, there's a very powerful scene very early in the film. They used it in pretty much every trailer for this movie, where his daughter is sort of pouting and she asks, "Why did you name me after something bad?" And he said, "Murphy's Law doesn't mean that something bad will happen. It just means that whatever can happen will happen." That's not what Murphy's Law means. No. Murphy's Law means if something can go wrong, it will. You can't change the meaning of a thing and then draw a profound message from the meaning of that thing. Like, make up a new phrase. Don't make it Murphy's Law.
Yeah. I have to say, when it comes to the daughter, I loved all of the actresses who play the daughter.
Yes.
They're incredible. I thought, so apparently it was supposed to be a boy.
Really?
Yeah, the way that, so Christopher Nolan's brother, John, who has since passed away, he wrote it as a son. And when Nolan came in to direct it, which apparently wasn't just a given, he changed it. Because his thought was, we have seen a lot of men or like fathers and the way they shape their sons' lives, but we don't have a lot of fathers and daughters. Yeah. And awesome. You expect to be protected and then suddenly they're gone. And I had a little bit of a problem with that quote, but you know, whatever. And so I liked this, this relationship that they had built up. It's interesting, especially when in comparison to the brother and his relationship to his son. I did not grow up with any siblings in the household, and neither did he. Nope. So the concept of like, he's playing favorites pretty heavily, which, you know, it's a movie, whatever, but I was really taken aback by that. And I had a moment of, oh my God, like, I've heard of this happening, but like, does it really happen? Like, do people really do that? So, you know, I'm curious if anybody wants to tell me about their trauma, sorry. But
well, I mean, all the performances in this movie were awesome. You know, of course, the scene, almost all the performances in this movie were awesome. Of course, the scene of Matthew McConaughey watching 23 years worth of his children's lives, that is heartbreaking and perfect, and he just nails it. In fact, I actually turned to Lacey afterward and I said, I bet, and I have no way of proving this, but my spidey sense tells me that was the scene that this movie was based on. That, like, somebody had an idea of this guy watching the home videos of the kids he didn't get to watch grow up, and they built a movie about that.
And I would have said that has to be true because it's such an incredible scene, except for we learned that it's the scientist, what's his name?
Kip Thorne.
Kip Thorne, who pitched the idea. He was the one who had the idea first. So it's not actually the case, but it really feels that way because it's just sort of the emotional pivot point of the whole film. And Matthew McConaughey does a great job. I mean, Jessica Chastain is great in this movie. Anne Hathaway, like, they do good jobs with their characters. I don't like a lot of their characters. I don't think a lot of their characters are very well done. But I love the poltergeist stuff. I love that the daughter is like, I have a poltergeist. I mean, I've had a poltergeist. True story. Our producer knows. She witnessed it. I'm not lying. Not terrifying. A little disconcerting. And it happened for, I would say 7-8 years, something like that. So I was really into the idea that we were going to have a little bit of not like true sci-fi, like horror sci-fi, but just to have a juxtaposition, and they pretty quickly took that away.
Yeah.
Which is fine. You know, it's fine. I will tell that story someday. Now's not really the time.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that I found, just like on a personal note in watching this movie, it was so bizarre to watch this movie during the pandemic for the first time, because you see them putting on their masks and all of this stuff. And I know it's because of the dust storms, but
it's a different cause, but a very familiar behavior.
Yeah, and it felt really like weird, and I felt seen by a movie that was made in the past, and it just kind of, I don't know, it made me really uncomfortable, but in kind of a fun way. And that's nothing that the movie could have predicted, obviously, but just a matter of timing, I suppose.
Well, you know, the poltergeist, this is one of those things that, again, I don't like saying bad things about movies. I actually struggle with criticizing movies a lot. I like to like things, and I don't like talking people out of it. But, like, one of the things that I was just left kind of shaking my head about is they establish that she thinks she's got a ghost, and the dad is just not believing it because, you know, he's a man of science and all that. And then there's a gravitational anomaly in that room that he gets really fascinated by and realizes that it's coordinates, and he follows those coordinates, and it turns out to be a real place. And so clearly, like, something's up. Like, there is a thing that is happening in that room, some kind of gravitational anomaly with an actual message that leads to an actual place. This is a real thing. And then he comes back, and she says, my poltergeist sent me another message. And he just, like, rolls his eyes and then moves on. And it's like, what? Like, you already decoded the last message from this ghost. You don't think that it's possible that he sent a follow-up? Like, how is that? That just doesn't track for me. Like,
I want to know how a gravitational pull happens specifically in this room and not in the room below it.
Yeah, it's not.
But, you know, there's...
Yeah.
I really struggled with a lot of that stuff, like the gravitational pull thing, because what we get at the end is, okay, are there two answers to what's happening in her room? Is it that he is doing a bunch of the stuff, he's doing the books and whatnot. I guess he's doing the dust as well.
Yep.
But it sounds like this has been going on for a while. And like other things have been falling off and breaking.
That's actually an interesting point. She specifically says this ghost has been happening for a little while at the beginning of the film, and the only things that we see him do in the film are the stuff that we saw on camera.
Right.
We didn't see him create any effects that she was already.
He doesn't do anything to the combines, but the combines come, and supposedly it's because of a gravitational pull. Like, why did the combines move?
Yeah.
And
I guess maybe we're supposed to assume that it's the aliens, the future humans, like sort of setting up this experiment, that they created the bridge, and so it created some weird stuff, and then he used the bridge to send a message. I don't know. It's not explained.
It feels like we're reaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. I don't know which one of these. I will say, first of all, I do like that they touched on some real, honest to goodness, what we do today science, which we know about firsthand. The GPS workings of a combine. We have a friend who is a farmer in Denmark, and he's got like his master's in agriculture, and
Very high-tech farmer.
Yeah, and it's incredible. We were down in New Zealand, and he came down to work on some farms and look at managements and all of that stuff. And one day he was showing us like how he could hop onto this software, and from space, like he could see where these combines were in Denmark, and he could plan a route for them, and he could base that on what he's seeing from the satellite images.
Not just what he's seeing. He had a system where you could tell the computer what is being grown, and the computer knows what shade of green that plant is from space.
Yeah.
And then it would map out the path of the machine to go through the field, and it could put different amounts of fertilizer in different portions of the field based on the green pattern and where different plants needed different amounts of fertilizer.
And you see like a glimpse of that in this because they're not manned. He says that he was able to like reboot all of their GPS systems and whatever, which is cool. So like there was this moment of, oh, that exists in the world.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
And we don't, I don't think you see as much of it, at least where I'm from in the U.S., of unmanned combines, but
they're coming.
They're
like
coming.
In 50 years, it's going to be.
Oh, that's going to just be the norm. Anybody actually in the combine is going to be like
quirky old guy who hadn't updated with the times,
who doesn't want to do it. But okay, I have to tell you something I'm really mad about. I know there's something every time, but listen, you guys. How is it that in every fucking space movie there's a drowning scene? How is this possible? I don't understand, and I would really like. I'm going to start calling it a cliche, so that people feel bad when they do it in movies. I need to get this out there. That
Lacey's not a fan of drowning.
I mean, who is? I am terrified of drowning, thus the scuba certification, which I think we've talked about when we talked about gravity.
Yeah.
I can't handle it, and I'm done with it. So if anybody would like to be out there on Twitter with me mocking the movies that come out with this, let's just we could tag team maybe and just make people feel stupid for putting it in their movies.
Yeah. No more sci-fi movies with drowning.
No.
Not allowed. Yeah.
Christ almighty, no. So it's you guys, I cannot. They did can I tell you, they did something to me that flabbergasted me. And I kind of appreciate it, and I also totally loathe it. Which is, for the first time ever, I understood how anti-science people feel. Like actively and with great angst, I had a reaction of like, you guys, none of this science is believable, so I think you're full of bullshit, and I hate you.
And and to be clear, I think what Lacey's saying is, I don't buy it, and therefore I think it's objectively untrue.
Yes, that.
Which is what anti-vaxxers do. Like, it's something, at a certain point, I don't believe in ghosts, and therefore I think your ghost sighting isn't true. That's reasonable, but there is a point at which it doesn't matter if you don't find it believable. It might still be true, like vaccines don't cause autism, like climate change is real. These are things that are objectively true. They can be proven with evidence, and the fact that you personally don't believe it is irrelevant. But Lacey was saying after this movie, that was her sort of takeaway, was a lot of the science in this movie, I don't believe it, and therefore I'm just assuming it's not true.
And what I realized, what separates me from people that are anti-science, is in the real world, we have built up lots of trust. The scientific community has done their due diligence to prove that they are not full of shit. Nolan did not do that.
Yeah.
And my trust wasn't there. There was no reason to trust any of the science of this movie. I am mad that I understood the anti-science people for a brief second before I logicked my way out of feeling like I'm a part of that group at all.
Well, that is a perfect segue into talking about the science of the Martian. But first, I want to address a comment from one of our viewers. Rylan chimed in that there was no drowning in The Martian. And I just have to correct you there, actually. There wasn't in the film, but in the book of The Martian, there is actually a scene where he talks about making the bathtub and taking a bunch of Vicodin to help with his back, and he expresses worry that he might pass out in his bathtub and drown on Mars. So
He says Mark Watney almost drowned in space.
he says, re to drowning, no drowning in The Martian.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I misinterpreted. If you were saying that there is potentially drowning in The Martian, then you go for it. But yeah, this is the fourth thing that we've talked about on the synthesis. We did Apollo 13, we did Gravity, we did The Martian, and now we're doing Interstellar. And yeah, there actually is in the book of The Martian a reference to the potential for drowning on Mars. So that's 3 out of 4 so far. Lacey's not a fan.
I cannot watch people.
But that being said, so when it comes to,
I
Lacey had a
have
thought.
one question for you.
Yes.
So this is a big question, I think. Before you get into the science,
Okay.
This is philosophy of humans. Okay.
Yeah.
There's this quote. Now, our brand at Edgeworks is that we are explorers, and we think that it's innate to the human experience. But there's a quote that is, "We're explorers and pioneers, not caretakers." Cooper says that to his father-in-law, whatever,
Father-in-law, I think.
when they're sitting on the porch. I think he's saying it to his father-in-law.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I completely disagree. I think that a big part of the reason humans are explorers is because we are caretakers, because we are always looking for ways to provide for our family. When we say humans are explorers, we don't just mean that guy wandered off into the forest and was never seen again. What we mean is that guy wandered off into the forest and then came back 5 years later with all these stories and resources and, whatever it was that he went off to find. He found it and he brought it back. Coming back is a necessary part of being an explorer. Otherwise, you're just a wanderer. And to me, that is an act of caretaking. You're bringing things back to society. There's another quote in Interstellar that dovetails with that nicely, which is, I think it's Cooper is talking about how, people are empathetic, but he says that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight.
Man.
And I just thought that is, was that man? So that is the absolute antithesis of The Martian. We actually talked about how the ending of The Martian, the book, the final thing on the last page of that book is about how people will come to each other's aid. People have a natural instinct to look out for each other, and every human is at least a little bit invested in the well-being of total strangers. And it's this incredibly hopeful and optimistic statement about humanity, and I think borne out objectively by human history. People have looked out for strangers all the time. You can look up any number of stories about, Native Americans raising $1,000 to send to Ireland during the Irish potato famine, and all these stories of people looking out for complete strangers. And so I found that, the philosophy behind Interstellar was surprisingly cynical. It was like,
and it's not truthful to the story itself. Why does he do this? Why does he go into space? He's not doing it for himself. He's not doing it to sate his own curiosity.
Right.
No, he's doing it because he wants better for his family.
Yeah. And for everyone.
And
this is clearly somebody who's not just looking out for his family. He's looking out for the world. He keeps talking about how we have to go back and save everybody back on Earth. And that is being a caretaker. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I needed to hear you talk about it. But launch into the science.
So on the science, at Edgeworks and here at the Synthesis, we have this interesting dichotomy where, or not even that interesting, we have what was previously a clear dichotomy between things that are scientifically accurate and things that are not. And obviously there's a spectrum. There are things that are kind of scientifically accurate. We talked about how on The Martian, it's mostly scientifically accurate, but the dust storm at the beginning was not. But generally, if you pick out any one thing, it'll fall somewhere on a spectrum of scientifically accurate or not. And man, Interstellar's kind of all over the place. This movie is often held up as a very grounded, realistic take. It's got a lot of things that it holds up as being very scientific. And of course, Kip Thorne, out there, Nobel Prize winning scientist, worked on the movie, came up with part of the idea for the movie. There's actually a funny story out there about how the the image of the black hole in Interstellar was the most accurate image that anyone had ever generated of a black hole, because film studios have more money than universities, and so they were able to get like the computing power necessary to generate this incredibly realistic image that no university had ever had the resources to do. That's awesome, you know? The images of Saturn were gorgeous. Like, there were so many things in this. Apparently, I don't know quantum physics and associated calculations, but apparently the image of the wormhole is pretty much exactly what a wormhole would look like. On the visual level, there's so many things about this movie that are dead on, just perfect. And then they do this other stuff that's just so out of left field wrong. Like, even Kip Thorne, I did have to chuckle. Kip Thorne, if you read interviews, I've read just today I read 8 interviews with Kip Thorne about Interstellar, and you can tell this guy has both professional and emotional investment in Interstellar being scientifically accurate. And even Kip Thorne said that he cringes every time he sees the spaceship brush up against a frozen cloud. You guys, you know what happens when water freezes in the sky? It snows. Like, this is not an alien phenomenon. This is what happens. When ice forms in the sky, it falls down. Like, what? Is that seriously a thing that is in a movie that people are expected to watch and buy into? Like, there are things, you keep going back and forth. Apparently, so, giving credit where credit is due, there is actually the possibility of a planet orbiting so close to a black hole that 1 minute on, 1 minute on the, 1 hour on the planet is 7 years back on Earth. Apparently, when the movie first came out, a lot of people came out and said, hey, that's not possible. That amount of time dilation is not possible. And Kip Thorne actually came back and said, yes, it is. Here's the math. I did the math. And everybody kind of had to retract that. So when you read interviews about Interstellar, that is actually a thing. You'll see retractions about the fact that that planet couldn't exist. But what that's brushing past is no one could stand on that planet. If you're orbiting that close to a black hole, you would die so fast. You would be covered in so many X-rays, and the amount of gravity that your body would be just absolutely torn apart. There's actually, in the world of funny English words, there's a word called spaghettification, which people talk about relevant to black holes. And what that is, the idea is that gravity gets weaker by distance, right? We all sort of intuitively know that. The further you get away from a star, the less the star's gravity is affecting you, right? Specifically, gravity grows weaker by the inverse square of distance. So what that means is that if you double the distance, the amount of gravity goes down to a quarter of what it would be, right? Now, generally, that's not a negligible, amount of change. The amount of distance between your feet and the sun and your head and the sun is 0.0000000 on and on and on and on and on, 1%. Who cares? But the amount of gravity that's put out by a black hole is so huge that you actually get to a point where the amount of distance between your head and the black hole and your feet and the black hole is actually significant, that your head is experiencing a lot more gravity than your feet. And what happens when your head is experiencing more gravity than your feet? Well, your head starts to get pulled toward the black hole. But what happens when your head gets pulled toward the black hole? It's now even closer to the black hole, which means even more gravity is being exerted on your head that isn't being exerted on your feet. And so any object that gets within a certain range of a black hole starts to get stretched out. And they literally call it spaghettification.
So they look like Slender Man.
They look like Slender Man, yeah. Like whatever the object is, you can literally imagine it getting stretched out by the force of gravity. And of course, people don't stretch real well. People are not very stretchy, and so what would actually happen is that you would just get ripped apart. That's what would happen if you stand on this planet. If you go to a planet where the time dilation is so intense because you're so close to a black hole, which is possible, thank you, Kip Thorne, you would die. So that is sort of the weird. Lacey's over here literally crying with laughter, I think, at how worked up I'm getting.
No, it's a combination of That and SoFlo totally seeing right through me.
Yes. SoFlo Trash Panda in the comments says, "I can see I love this nerd on Lacey's face." Yep, that's what that look is. Yep.
And also, I'm totally laughing at him. So
Yes.
it's a combination of things, but that's absolutely good catch.
I found myself bouncing back and forth and having this really weird reaction to this movie because on the one hand, it presents itself as a peer of The Martian. Like it presents itself as a very grounded, very realistic science fiction story. But then on a really regular basis, it's throwing stuff at us that is sort of like, I could have told you that's not a thing in middle school. Like that's not how that works. Everybody knows that if you get close to a black hole, you die. And, you know, those sorts of things. And so, yeah, and so I was doing research into the scientific aspects, and I'm going to rein in my rant here and address some of the more specific things. I recognize that I am deep nerd. And that is not a standard that I hold a lot of people to. No. Like, I recognize whenever I watch a sci-fi movie that I am bringing more to it than the filmmakers mean for me to.
Yes.
And oftentimes, that's fine. You know, when I watch Stargate, the science in Stargate is a joke. But that's fine, because that's not what they were going for. They were going for an epic adventure, and it's fun, and it's awesome. But this movie does seem to present itself as a scientifically grounded story. So, for example, one of the first things that I bumped on in this movie is the Blight. And this is actually an interesting choice, and I feel like part of it was my misunderstanding, or at least the misunderstanding of people who talked about this movie to me. Because I had always been under the impression that Interstellar was set in a world in which climate change had ruined the world. And that's actually not true. They don't talk about climate change in this movie. The dire ecological straits that Earth is in has nothing to do with climate change or carbon emissions or rising temperatures or rising sea levels or any of that. Those things that we all sort of expect to lead to a world like this are pretty much absent. The reason that the world is like this is because of the Blight. They don't go into a lot of detail on what the Blight is, but it seems to be some kind of infection or microbe, maybe some pest like a small insect or something like that. But whatever it is systematically killing off entire species of crops. Wheat has been eradicated. Okra has been eradicated. Now it's coming for corn. I did have to sort of chuckle that wheat, okra, and corn were the three big crops that they held up. And I don't know, maybe I'm weird for not thinking that okra like sort of deserves to be on the same level as wheat and corn.
I would have said peanuts.
Yeah, something. Yeah,
I mean, like, honestly, because like that's a huge crop.
Yeah, like beans or something. I didn't realize that okra was sort of the linchpin of world hunger. But maybe it is. Maybe it's not where I grew up. But the Blight is actually the big bad of this film. It's not anything that humans did to our world. The Blight is specifically described as killing crops, but also it breathes nitrogen. Michael Caine has this scene where he's talking about how humans breathe oxygen, which is only 21% of Earth's atmosphere. This is accurate. Yeah. Nitrogen makes up almost 80% of Earth's atmosphere. Again, accurate. And the Blight breathes nitrogen. Okay. A lot of organisms do interact with nitrogen, and they use nitrogen. You know, nitrates are important for plant life. Nitrogen fixing into the soil is an important part of, you know, the life cycle of many ecosystems. But I know enough chemistry to know that nitrogen is not nearly as reactive as oxygen. You can't really breathe nitrogen for any useful chemistry, because oxygen has a lot of free electrons, essentially. Oxygen wants to bond with things and give away its electrons. Nitrogen is very stable. So the kind of chemistry that goes on in the lungs of any number of creatures on this planet, you can't really do that with nitrogen. It's not interchangeable with oxygen. This is an example of something that I don't really blame the filmmakers for not integrating, because who cares? It breathes nitrogen, sure. It is a little weird that they tossed that in when they could have just had it be the Blight is like a locust plague. Like, why did it have to be breathing nitrogen? it seems like if you're going to throw in a scientific fact like that, then it should be right. And if it's not right, then just don't include that line. But whatever.
I didn't really know what it was supposed to mean. Like, okay, it breathes nitrogen, so what?
The implication from Michael Caine's character is that it is therefore somehow better suited to life on Earth than we are. So it's going to breed, and then Murphy's generation, there's not going to be any more oxygen left. Which again,
I think it's just that there's not going to be enough food.
No, he basically says
well, I
that,
missed some stuff.
Yeah, there's a line where he says the first generation to starve, or the first generation to starve is going to be the last generation. No, I had it backwards. The last generation to starve is going to be the first generation to suffocate. And that Murphy's generation, there's not going to be enough oxygen in the air for them to breathe. Which again, I'm not sure how them breathing nitrogen means that we're running out of oxygen. It seems like if they breathed oxygen, it would be like if there was some crazy microbe that was using up all the oxygen and the plants couldn't replace it fast enough, then that would lead to that problem. So that was sort of the first thing that I bumped on, was the nature of the blight. And then, you get into these things around like NASA is being hidden from the public because they wouldn't fund it, despite the fact that it is humanity's only hope for saving the world. So it seems like everybody would want to fund it. And how do you fund multiple missions out to Saturn with astronauts and keep that secret? It's like line item budget in Congress, $72 trillion for R&D. Like, that's not really something you can hide.
I do have to say that takes me back to that scene where the teacher is talking about how the Apollo missions were just propaganda.
Yeah.
And raise your hand if that was just horrifying.
Yeah.
Like, that made my stomach churn so much to just, to hear it as something this is true, and my lived experience is that's bullshit.
It's not just believed, it's you don't believe that. Like it's a problem that his daughter doesn't believe this.
Yeah.
It's so commonly accepted that anybody who doesn't accept it is weird.
And you just it's things like this that make you look back in history at our different misconceptions, the different beliefs that have cropped up over time that have been later quashed or whatnot. That it just kind of freaks you out, this mindset that we can get into, that there's a word for it when we all just kind of follow.
Well, it's not mass psychosis, but
well, so I'm sure someone will come up with it, but it's a psychology term. And anyway, I hated that.
I did. In a world of Save the Cat, which for those of you who aren't screenwriters, Save the Cat is a phrase about how to get the audience to align with your hero. If you take a character like, for example, Tony Stark, who's kind of fundamentally unlikable, like he's kind of a jerk and a womanizer and not in any way someone that you would actually approve of in real life, how do you make the audience get on his side? Well, you do what's called saving the cat, which is that you show him doing something good so that the audience can kind of pin everything on that. In a Save the Cat way, that was probably the moment that I fell in love with Cooper, was when he got super pissed off at her, and then she asked, "How are you going to discipline your daughter?" And his response was, "I think I'm going to take her to a baseball game." Like, yes, that is good parenting.
Yes,
that is
exactly.
excellent.
Yeah.
And so, for example, in this dichotomy that Interstellar strikes between scientifically realistic and not, again, if you read interviews, if you read articles about Interstellar from 2014 when it was first coming out, apparently a lot of people were still unfamiliar with the idea of gravity can slow down time. That was an idea that I guess I'm just nerd enough not to realize that not everybody knew that. But yeah, the idea that you can get so close to a black hole that time actually slows down, and so there's this planet where time flows differently than it is back on Earth. That was like this revolutionary idea that a lot of people really responded to, and I love that. Like that is exactly the kind of thing that we try to do here at Edgeworks, is introducing people to scientific ideas. But if that's true on the ground, it's going to be true in orbit too. So like, how did they experience a couple hours and then they go up to orbit and their buddy has experienced 23 years. It's not just Earth that experienced 20. Like, that would make sense because they're all near the black hole, but Earth isn't. But they're literally in orbit. Like, the atmosphere is like experiencing time differently than orbit did. And these are the things that I was just looking around going, how is anybody describing this movie as scientifically accurate? You can't travel, 10 miles up and suddenly experience a 60,000% increase in time dilation. Like, that's not at all how this works. And, yeah, I love that they introduced time dilation. But you would die on that planet. And by the way, you wouldn't be able to catch it. In order to experience that kind of time dilation, you would have to be so close to the black hole that the planet would be orbiting like a hummingbird. Like, it would just be around the black hole. And so which frankly would have made an amazing scene in this movie, is how do we catch up to this planet? Like, we're coming up, the planet is just blurring past, and they have to sort of slingshot around the black hole just to pick up enough speed to land on the planet at all. That would have been cool, and it would have solved several of the issues with the film. It was just a very strange thing. Another perfectly good example is I actually loved the representation of the inside of the black hole and the way it represented time. So there's a thing that you can look up that is, if you ever want to just bend your mind and really just kind of break your understanding of the universe, look up what a tesseract is. A tesseract is a word that gets tossed around in science fiction a lot. It was used in the Marvel movies early on, but it is also a very specific thing. And that is, if you go in dimensions, and by dimensions here, we're not using the sci-fi term of like parallel universes, like going to another dimension. We're using it in the geometric term, like the first dimension, second dimension. That's a two-dimensional image. So the first dimension would be a line. The second dimension is a flat plane. So you can imagine a shape in 2 dimensions would be like a square, right? And then the third dimension is height. So if you imagine a square on a piece of paper, now imagine it sort of turning into a hologram, and like the square rises up off the paper, and now it's a cube, right? So you can say that a 2-dimensional square and a 3-dimensional cube are the same object in different dimensions.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
If you take that one step further, a 4-dimensional cube is called a tesseract. So from square to cube to tesseract. Those are all the same object in a different number of dimensions. And if you were to ask someone who does geometry for a living, the way they would define this is a square is a set of points where each one is at 90 degrees to the 2 adjacent, right? A cube is a set of points where each one is at 90 degrees to the 3 adjacent, hence 3 dimensions. A tesseract is a shape where each point is at right angles to 4 other points. You can look up images of tesseracts on the internet, and they will absolutely melt your brain. It's crazy to look at these things. But the only time I've ever seen somebody represent something other than a cube as a tesseract is Interstellar. The representation of that little girl's room in the third act of Interstellar looks like a tesseract, the way it sort of breaks out into these sort of infinite recursive representations of geometry. It's this, it sort of reads as a cube despite having hallways going off in every direction. Your brain wants to say this is a box, even though it's clearly not. Like, it looks like a tesseract. It's brilliant. It's the coolest representation of 4-dimensional geometry I've ever seen. And the way they got there was Matthew McConaughey throwing himself into a black hole.
Wait.
What?
Not just throwing himself into it. He flew into it and then ejected himself because spaceships have ejection buttons.
Yeah, they have ejector seats. Like, stepping aside from the black hole of it all, what is step 2 on a spaceship with an ejector seat? Like, if your spaceship is about to blow up and you hit the ejector seat and the thing flies off like a fighter pilot and throws you up into space, now what, man? You're in space. Like, nobody's going to come get you, especially if you're flying away at 60 miles an hour or whatever that was. Like, you would have been better off just blowing up with the ship. And so they fitted this thing with an ejector seat. Why, I don't know. He flew around a black hole and didn't get spaghettified. Why, I don't know. He also didn't get fried by X-rays. He also didn't get burned up with all the ejecta that's flying around the black hole and falling into it. He flies into the black hole. He's perfectly fine. He finds himself in a representation of his daughter's bedroom, and by the way, never questions it. Like, there's no point at which Cooper looks around and goes, "What? This is so weird. Am I losing my mind? Am I dead?"
He's not the only one who doesn't question things. Though.
Exactly.
It's bizarre.
And it's this weirdly frustrating mix of really insightful visuals, really beautiful representations of science, paired with just what the hell kind of presentation of it.
Can I tell you, is now a good time for me to tell them about some people's beliefs about the ending?
Feel free, yeah.
I mean, we can always come back to the science. And
if I just want to rant some more, yeah.
Listen, I'm not taking part in the science stuff because I mostly wrote, "This is bullshit science," 100 times next to, "These are not scientists," and "These are not astronauts." Yeah. So, like, there's not a lot. I wasn't concise because I was so upset. Yeah. But okay, so I had to figure out the ending of this movie. I wasn't wild about it, and I found some reviewers that posit, I'm not saying this is how you should interpret it, but this is how some people interpreted it because, you know, Christopher Nolan doesn't necessarily insist that you take his work literally.
Yeah, he's a storyteller who enjoys differing interpretations of his work.
Yeah, and you know, one of the nice things is he says during an interview with maybe the Daily Beast that he doesn't want to tell anybody his interpretation of it because he doesn't want that to be held up as like essentially the be all end all.
Yeah, the official story.
Yeah. So, which I think is that is a good thing I can say about Christopher Nolan. Mm-hmm. Okay, so some reviewers posit that Cooper actually dies after ejecting himself from his craft. And what happens, there are a couple of different versions, but I'll give you the gist, is that weird fight that happens between him and Man that doesn't feel like it belongs in this film, and the soliloquy or monologues that Man does about survival and how we think of our children's faces, or, you know, all of that stuff, and how our bodies instinctually hang on for as long as they can for various bond reasons, I guess. That's what happens here. And so Cooper is ejected from his craft. He is, we're seeing the embodiment of this conversation, and his instincts take over, so he lasts a little bit longer, and either he dies, and then the moment after death, he's able to interact with this tesseract or interact in some capacity to communicate with his daughter, or he's able to use this higher dimension, because we're told that the humans of the future, have
apparently fifth dimensional beings.
Yes. Yeah. And we cannot perceive that. Current living beings cannot perceive this dimension. So in his death throes, essentially, he is able to access that, because in death, time has no meaning, and it's not really quantifiable. It stops being linear. So he is able to access that fifth dimension, communicate with his daughter right before dying. So right before or right after his death. And people say, because like there's no way that Anne Hathaway's character is still alive. He's told to go be with her. We see that, you know, there are these moments of symbolism that we see around his daughter, the baseball field right outside of her hospital window, which is kind of weird. Anyway, so his body pushes him to survive just long enough so that this can all happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, a lot of people really believe that this is actually the
story
end,
as
the
being
story.
told. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, you know, I can't really say one way or the other what I'd prefer, because I mean, I guess most people want a happy ending. I just wanted an ending that I found to make sense. And I'm not the only one who thinks that this movie doesn't make sense, because Jessica Chastain says,
really?
Yes. When I watch the film now, I still don't understand everything in it. But the main part of this film isn't about science. It's about love. You have to feel it. If you go into the movie, even though the scope is large with space travel, at its core, it's a story about a father and a daughter. If you let that wash over you, that is enough. And I'm like, speak for yourself, lady. Not enough for me.
Yeah. And I mean, like, that part was good. You know, the part with his connection to his daughter, and his daughter growing up bitter and angry, and then ultimately
watching his son.
finding catharsis,
Yeah.
and then her and her relationship with her brother, and like all of that stuff was good. I just have no idea why they felt the need to do half scientifically accurate. And even on the human side, like, you know, there are a bunch of things that we haven't gone into, because this isn't going to turn into a 3-hour just sort of nitpick. But, you know, things like, man, they've got some really bad psychological screening processes at this NASA facility. Like, they don't know how to pick astronauts anymore, do they? They really.
They stop. He doesn't need to be trained again.
Yeah, exactly. Like he just shows up and they're like, cool, we're launching tomorrow. You don't need training. And then there are several scenes in the movie where he's like, interesting, what's that? And he's like, it's the wormhole we're here to go through. And he's like, what's a wormhole? And it's like, you didn't read the training manual or something?
Yeah,
like,
and there's a moment where, like, he's mad at his daughter. He's like, don't make me leave like this, because she doesn't want to talk to him. And I'm like, dude, you don't get to put this on her.
Yeah.
You're making the decision. Like, and I get why you're making the decision, but this is not her fault.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah. So.
I'm really tired of Chris Nolan and his time obsession.
It is an interesting thing. Every movie Chris Nolan makes is about time, and
Except for the Batman movies.
even though, I mean, the second and third weren't about time, but the first one was very noted for the fact that it had a non-linear story structure. It was, if you watch Batman Begins, it kind of is about time. It's about moments in Batman's life that are paralleled, happening sequentially in film order that were not sequential in story order.
So he's playing with the storytelling in terms of time, but the theme is not.
Yeah, the theme is not time. Basically, Batman Begins is the same as Dunkirk, where it's a linear story, but it's represented in a non-linear way. So he still gets to play with time as a storyteller. But yeah, I mean, Dunkirk, Tenet, Interstellar, Memento, Batman Begins. It's like time is just his thing. Yeah.
I am with Iman Economist on this. I think that Alex, you have to produce the Interstellar remake.
I would love to produce I mean, it's going to be different, but
I mean,
actually, honestly, it might not even be that different. That's the thing that I kept getting hooked on, was that so many of the scientifically inaccurate things in this movie didn't need to be. Like, you could have done this very easily. You know, like, why did they need to hit a frozen cloud? Just cut that line. That's not. You don't need that. That's fine. Why did Blight need to breathe nitrogen? It doesn't need to. It's just a crazy super pest. You know, it's the planetary version of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Sold. Done. That is entirely plausible, and it carries exactly the same narrative, you know, storytelling potential as this version.
See, when this remake happens, because obviously it just kind of has to now, you deal with the science, and I'm going to fix some of the character stuff that I couldn't handle. Yeah. One of which, well, okay, first I will say, Dr. Mann crying into their arms when he comes out of his cryo. Oh my God, it was so lovely.
This is what I'm talking about. With, like, even the characters that I didn't like as characters, the performances were great.
Yeah, well, and you know, that was very likely written into the script. So that was like, there were some great things.
Yeah.
But like, also, Murph lights her brother's farm,
On
fields
fire.
on fire,
Yeah.
and then goes back into the house and and also is going to take his family, which is reasonable because his family is obviously being abused by him.
Yeah.
And so I'm here for her taking off with the family. But she hugs him when he comes back out, and I'm like, dude, you are taking this man's life away from him. You don't get to hug him. Even if he's in the wrong, you don't get to hug him. And B, this man is not going to let you hug him.
Yeah.
He's an abusive asshole.
He's an abusive asshole. You're taking his family. You burned his crops. Literally everything of value in his life you're taking away from him. And then you want to hug him because, you realized your dad's still alive.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as if he's going to believe you.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was just that moment I gasped out loud. I was just like, how did this get put into this film?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. I think from any point of view to have that moment happen, it was just, it was too weird.
Listen, we've got a lot more thoughts that we could share, but I think we've made our thoughts known for the most part. And I do love to end on hope. I like to end on an upbeat. And so I adore the fact that our listeners right now in the chat are all starting to chime in. Let's make it happen. Edgeworks remake of Interstellar, TV series, Interstellar meets Terra Genesis. When can we start talking Kickstarter? Yes. I love it.
I think we are here for it.
Yes.
We will not use organ music.
We will not use organ music, no.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring it down. What's one more thing that we can say about it? Good thing.
One more good thing that I will say about it is, I'll say this, that it is one more thing pushing forward the value that we celebrate at the Synthesis. It had a lot of flaws. It didn't do all the science perfectly right, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of people saw this movie and walked away saying that was an excellent movie that used realistic science, or so they thought, and that is of value.
Yes.
People walked away from Interstellar saying more movies should have realistic science.
You know what? I think that is a great note to end on. And good job for coming up with that.
Thank you.
Was drawing a huge blank, so well done, honey.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that is it for this episode of The Synthesis. Be sure to tune in next week on YouTube Live to watch us recording this live. Or if you're,
we're doing?
I think we're doing National Geographic's Mars. I think we're doing the first 3 episodes of National Geographic's Mars.
Yep.
So check it out and tune in next week for the live taping on YouTube Live. Otherwise, you can check it out on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Edgeworks Entertainment. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell and leave us some comments. We are lacking in engagement. So share it if you would.
Please.
Like it, comment it. Tell us why you think we're wrong about Interstellar. Tell us why you think we're right about Interstellar. However you feel about Interstellar, tell us.
Tell us we're right. I mean, obviously.
It's obviously better.
If you need to tell us we're wrong, I suppose we can handle that.
I guess the best way to put it is, if you feel like being wrong, you can tell us why we're wrong.
But just engage. That's all we're asking.
And if you like to listen to podcasts on iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts, check out The Synthesis by Edgeworks Entertainment and be sure to leave a review because we want to get it out as big as we can, as fast as we can.
That would be fabulous. Thank you, you guys.
Yes. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.
Bye.